Clear prop.
So, you want to be a pilot. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Central here. Hope you guys are having a wonderful day as always. Over the past few months, I've had a couple of people ask me to do a video on this topic, and I've been toying with the idea anyway. Basically just going over what it takes to get your pilot's license if that's something that you want to do. And, well, there are various ways you can go about it, but I'm going to go over 2 ways and the best approach for determining whether you want to pursue a pilot's license and what type of license you want to get. So let's go ahead and get into it. So what is step 1? Well, step 1 is going to be the same for everybody across the board, and that is my recommendation to go take a discovery flight or an initial flight. And what that is going to do is going to allow you to determine whether you actually want to continue to pursue your pilot's license. A lot of people, when they take that discovery flight, they're hooked. They want to go ahead and pursue their license, but there are some people who, flying just isn't their thing. They either get sick up there in the air, or for some other reason they're frightened by the experience. Some people are just like that, and, if you're not comfortable in an airplane, you don't need to be pursuing a pilot's license. So that's really the first step. If you've never flown before, you take that discovery flight. That way you'll have an informed decision as to whether you want to continue spending money in pursuing a pilot's license before you actually, spend anything on training materials or any kind of online course or something like that, which I'll get into later in the video. But before you spend lots of money, take that discovery flight and see if it's something you actually want to do. Now, you can get a discovery flight from a flight instructor. You can find a local flight instructor and just ask them for a discovery flight, and they will accommodate you. Typically, they're not very long. You're going to spend a few minutes on the ground doing a little bit of a briefing. You're going to go up. He'll show you how the airplane works, and maybe let you handle the controls a little bit, see if it's something that you want to do, and then, of course, have a little chat with you after the flight. That is a great option. There is another option, but you have to be a little more careful with it, and that is, finding a regular private pilot or maybe a commercial pilot who's willing to take you up and fly you around a little bit. Now, the reason I say you've got to be careful taking your first flight with a private pilot is because not all private pilots are as level-headed and easygoing as I am. Most are. Most of the time, your experience is going to be just fine with a private pilot. They're going to fly just as well as any flight instructor, and everything's going to be hunky-dory. The problem is, if you get with one that isn't terribly proficient, or one that is a little more on the wild side, you may not enjoy the experience. You may get scared away from pursuing your certificate. So you got to be a little more careful whenever you go to fly with a private pilot. That having been said, it's still a good option, and it's going to be a whole heck of a lot cheaper. Most of the time, a private pilot will take you up for free. At most, they're going to charge you the pro rata rate for the flight, which is going to be less than half, and that's for legal reasons. But, typically it's going to be free. However, a free ride, you get what you get. Now, I don't want you thinking I'm saying that's a bad option, because it's not necessarily a bad option. It's just an option you got to be a bit more careful with. There's one other benefit, of course, to getting your discovery flight with a flight instructor, and that is that you can log that time quite often. So you're going to be getting your first few tenths or maybe even up to an hour in your logbook with that initial flight. So there's some pros and cons to both methods. So you've taken your discovery flight, you enjoyed it, and you want to pursue aviation further. But now is the time to make a very important decision. How do you want to pursue aviation? Do you want to pursue aviation as a career? For instance, do you want to go to the airlines? Or do you just want to pursue aviation recreationally? You just want to fly a single-engine airplane on the weekends occasionally, that sort of thing. Well, you've got 2 different methods of getting there, and really you need to make your decision right now as to whether you go to a Part 141 school or go through Part 61 flight training. And we're going to spend a lot of time on Part 61 because that's the one I'm most familiar with. but we will talk briefly and first about Part 141. So if your intent is to become a airline pilot, to get your air transport pilot certificate, you're probably going to want to go with a Part 141 school. And the reason for that is they are fast-paced, they are very much geared toward that career, and they are very much structured. The type of curriculum that they have is structured directly by the Federal Aviation Administration, and they are structured that way because of how fast-paced they are. If you want to get certain certifications in Part 61, it's going to take more time. For instance, it requires 40 hours of flight time in a Part 61 environment. That's bare minimum. You're always going to do more than bare minimum. That's bare minimum, 40 hours, in order to get your private pilot's license. However, in a Part 141, it's only 35 hours. Now, 5 hours doesn't sound like a lot, but it really is. So the hour requirements are a lot less in Part 141 because of how fast-paced it is. Same with commercial. Commercial certificate, you got to have a minimum of 250 hours for that in Part 61, only 190 hours for that in Part 141. The other thing is they're going to get you all of the certifications you need in rapid succession. They're going to give you your single-engine land. They're going to get you your multi-engine. They're going to get you instrument. They're going to get you your instructor as well as your commercial instructor. Now, why are you going to get that? Well, Part 141 schools are more expensive. There's no way around it. It's quite scary how much it can cost. However, a lot of them offer a program whereby if you get your instructor certificate, you can actually work for them and pay off some of that debt. And while you're doing that, of course, build the hours you need to get into the airlines, because you've got to have something like 1,500 hours before you're even going to be considered for a first officer position. So there are ways to make it a little less expensive. By doing that, you can basically consider it kind of like indentured servitude. I know that sounds bad, but basically you can fly for the Part 141 as an instructor after you get to that point and help pay off your schooling. And that is absolutely the way to go if you're looking to get into the airlines. So now we're going to get into Part 61, and like I said, we're going to spend a little more time here because I am more familiar with it. And I don't want you to think that just because you're looking at, maybe just going Part 61 now and getting a pilot certificate just so you can fly recreationally, I don't want you to think that that just locks you into only flying recreationally. If you've got a Part 61 certification and you go on to get more hours and more certifications later on your own, you can still work your way into a career in aviation, whether it be with the airlines or in some other aspect, which I'll touch on a little bit later. But if you go Part 61, it doesn't mean that you can't have a flying career. It just means it's going to take longer and it could potentially cost more. However, that cost will be spread out over a considerably longer period of time. I personally went Part 61 because I had no interest in flying in the airlines. Part 61 is, of course, the way that you do want to go if you're only getting your recreational private pilot certificate. And actually, I should clarify, when I say that, I'm talking about a full private pilot certificate. There's something else called a recreational pilot certificate. We're not going to talk about that in this video. I'm talking about getting your full private pilot certificate for recreational purposes. So, let's go over some ways that you can save money. Obviously, it's going to cost money no matter how you do it. Whether it's Part 141, Part 61, you're going to be spending a considerable chunk of change in order to get your private pilot certificate. However, one thing that I would really recommend is that if you are to the point where you're definitely going to pursue your certificate, rather than spending money right away on in-person flight instruction, whether it be for ground school or in the air, I recommend that you look at online courses. Now, online courses, I know, are not for everybody. However, I took an online course for ground school, and online ground school is a whole lot cheaper than getting in-person ground school. And we're talking about a difference between hundreds of dollars and thousands of dollars. That kind of a difference. It's a whole lot cheaper, $200-300, you can take an online ground school, learn everything that you need to pass the written test, and that is going to be a really inexpensive way to begin your flight training. There are a couple of them out there. I'm not going to tell you which one I used, not because it was a bad program, but because it may not be the program for you. I'd really recommend that you check out a few different ones and see which one you actually want to go with, whether it be Gold Seal, Pilot Institute, King, regardless. Look at all of the different options out there and choose the one that's going to work best for you. And I can't stress enough how much I really do recommend the online courses. What they're going to do is they're going to show you a lot of the technical information regarding flying when it comes to weather, decision making, when it comes to how an airplane operates. There's a lot of information that you have to learn in order to pass the written test. And you may go through the course and decide, you know what, I just can't learn this stuff. And then again, you've only spent a few $100 as opposed to spending thousands of dollars. So they really are cost savings there. However, again, I have confidence in you folks. I think most of you will be able to learn the information. The other good thing is you can always go back with an online course and look at the information that you've already covered. If you have to go back and look at something again with an in-person flight instructor, it's going to cost you time, and time is money. So it's definitely worth a look when it comes to the online flight schools. Highly recommend that as an option. So at this point, if you've spent the money, you've got your online ground school, you're learning, you like the subject matter, you're confident with it, you're definitely going to pursue this to the end to get your private pilot certificate, there's something else that you need to start doing. While you are doing the ground school, you need to start saving some money, because there's no way around it. You are going to have to get some flight hours, and that's going to be one of the biggest costs in this whole deal. So while you're doing your online ground school, you're obviously working during the day or however you're earning money. You need to put a little bit of that aside. You know, maybe $100 a week, $200 a week. You need to start putting that money aside so that by the time you finish your online ground school, you've got some money to start with. Hopefully you've got enough money put aside that you can pay for the entirety of your flight training, because if you have to stop for any reason, if you run out of funds and you have to stop your actual flight training, you're going to forget what you've learned. You're going to have to do it over again. That's going to be more money. So while you're doing your online ground school, make sure that you're saving money so that when you get to the flying portion, you've got enough to do what you've got to do. Now, when it comes to the actual cost of the flight training itself, that can vary wildly. However, whenever you take an online ground school, if it's worth its salt, it's going to go over some of the current prices. You've got to consider, though, the cost of renting an aircraft. You've got to consider whether that cost includes fuel or not. You've got to consider the cost of your flight instructor, because they're going to charge hourly, and they can vary wildly. They might charge $25 an hour, or they might charge $55 an hour. They might charge quite a bit. It just depends on where you are. So like I said, the prices can vary wildly. Then you've got the FAA written exam, which is going to be maybe $100, $150. You've got, of course, to rent an aircraft for your check ride when you get to that point, and pay for the designated examiner. Again, it can vary wildly. I think I paid $400 or $500, something like that, for my check ride. So you've got to consider all of those costs. And like I said, you want to be able to pay all of that pretty quickly, get the time in pretty quickly, because if you, for instance, spend 40 hours, which, like I said, is bare minimum, you might spend $5,000-$6,000 depending on the cost of the aircraft rental and your flight instruction, or more. Again, like I said, when it comes to hours, typically there's often more hours involved than your 40-hour minimum, especially when it comes to the flight instructor, because you've got pre-flight briefings and things like that. So there are some serious costs there. Again, it can vary, but I would plan on $10,000 minimum to save up before you get started. At the end, if you've spent less, well, great, you've got some money in the bank. but I would say at a minimum you want to save up about $10,000 for those expenses. Now, there is one other thing that you need to consider, one other option, which could be a long-term cost saving, but it's a little bit risky. It is something that I did, so bear that in mind. I'm speaking from experience here. However, there's some risk involved, and we'll talk about it. And that is, you could potentially purchase your own airplane rather than rent. Now, that's a big decision. Obviously, buying an airplane is expensive. It's going to cost you well more than $10,000. But there's a good reason for doing it. The reason that I purchased an airplane is because I knew that eventually I wanted to pursue other certificates. Right now, I'm working on getting my instrument. I'm also working toward potentially getting my commercial. So I'm looking at getting other ratings. And if I were to pursue each of those individual ratings while having to rent an airplane and, of course, the instruction as well, those costs would be considerably higher than if I own the airplane and I can fly in it anytime I want. Then the only thing I've got to consider is insurance cost, hangar rent, and fuel. And maintenance. But those things you're going to essentially be paying for and then some whenever you're renting an aircraft. So for the same number of hours, it's a little less expensive, but not if you're only pursuing your private. If you're only pursuing your private and you're only going to fly every once in a while, renting is probably a better option. But if you're looking to fly a lot, you're looking to pursue other certificates later, and if you just want your own airplane, it might be something to consider buying the airplane before finishing your training. So that is another option. Probably not the option that most people are going to want to go with, but it is one, and it is one that I took. So yeah, that's basically it. I hope that I didn't ramble too much, and I hope that if you do want to pursue your pilot certificate, that this has been helpful. Maybe it can inform some of the decisions that you make going forward. In any case, thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys later.